So thanks for showing up. Welcome. This is my little presentation on level design, and this is based on kind of what I've done throughout my life in this on this journey of creating levels not only in 2D spaces but 3D spaces, and sort of the philosophy I've learned over time from various projects I've been on. Um, and I'm sad Brandon isn't here because I thought he would really appreciate the use of the Dark Souls imagery here because the bonfire itself is to me a symbol of level design because it's not just about the areas that are constructed in geometry. It's not just about the walls, the castles, the big sprawling landscapes, the hallways, the corridors. It's about what you put in it and also about the geometry. Those bonfires represent a sort of choke point in between all the action. It's a safe spot. It's a place to come back in between dealing with leagues of enemies. It resets the enemies. It's where you level up. It's where you get your health back. It's where you get your flasks back. It is a very important focal point in the Souls games and the Souls genre. And so, because of that, this is going to be a little bit about the geometry, but it's also about getting into the head of the player and the designer because being able to get into the head of the player is the greatest tool to your advantage as a level designer. It's just as much about psychology as it is about something like architecture or game design. So let's jump right into it. So why does level design matter? Who gives a shit, right? Like, whatever. It's you just make a pretty landscape, you make a forest, put some trees in there, whatever. Who cares? Put a POW block somewhere. Um, but really, what it is, everything just about that goes into the production of a game, whether we're talking the writing, the way the story is told and experienced by the player, the art that is beheld by the player's eyes, the sound that they experience through their ears, um, every aspect of the gameplay is all experienced in levels. And that takes many forms. Whether you're playing a puzzle game, it's the board on which you're doing the puzzle. If you're playing a fighting game, level design not so important really. But if you're playing most types of games, there is a stage, and that's a good way to think about it. If games are a grand production, then the levels represent the stage upon which all the actors perform their roles. So you, as the level designer, are the person in charge of the set. You're the set designer. You have to take all of these elements that are given to you and you have to represent them in the ways in which the people who made those elements want them to be represented. So you're doing that, you're handling all of that, and you're communicating that to the player in the way that is intended. It's a big responsibility, and in my opinion, it's one of the most important positions you can have working on a game. Um, and so there are some positions that are less important when it comes to level design, although they are still important indirectly. The programmer is still very helpful because they're the ones that give the level designer all the tools, and that they're still important, just because they're not mentioned in the previous slide. And then, of course, once you actually finish with the level, you have to come back and have people check your work. People have to come back and say, no, 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 it needs to be like this. No, 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 we need to have this look like this. No, we need the lights to be over here and not there. Um, and so your job is very important. It's kind of a synthesis of a lot of different things. And so what I'm going to teach you in this presentation or attempt to convey is that there are steps that I follow personally that I think are pretty good when it comes to creating levels, from the planning phase all the way to the production and then the refinement phase. And this picture in the top right, I included because when I was in art school, I was surprised to learn that the steps to a drawing were not too dissimilar from how I approach level design. You start with big shapes, big picture ideas, and then you refine as you go along. And within each step of that drawing, of that production, you might go back, but after you go to the next step, you don't go back. It's kind of like you're cementing it down, or you're flattening a layer in Photoshop, and that's very important not only to the cohesion of the final product, but also to the production and the timetable of a project. If you go back too much and you jump around too much, you'll undo the work that you've done, and you'll take extra time, and you'll make everybody upset, and nobody wants that. So these are my steps. The first step, obviously, as with most creative endeavors, is to plan. And the steps within these steps, I want you to just kind of keep those in the back of your mind because I'll go through each one. And in case you're worried about the length of the presentation, don't worry. You'll find that the planning section of this presentation is, in fact, the longest. It's also the least fun, but it gets more fun after that and only continues to become more fun, in my opinion. So plan, build, refine. Uh, and so in building, you see that we have testing, blocking, pacing, and that's Japanese for test because testing is really important and I didn't want to put it down twice, but I did anyway. And in refinement, we have polishing, rendering, texturing, and lighting. So I'll go through each one, and let's just get started with that. But before we go any further, incredibly important, you have to know your game. You have to know absolutely everything about your game. A good level designer has not only total knowledge on every single aspect of how the game is played, but how the character controls. You have to remember what I said, you put yourself in the headspace of different types of players. And without knowing that, for example, in Sonic, when you have at least one ring, you can get hit once. That's not the same thing as Mario. The coins don't matter unless you're getting 100 of them to get an extra life. If you get hit once, you're dead. That kind of thing. You need to know how the enemies behave. You need to know what the power-ups do. You need to know what the goal of the player is. You need to know how the player moves, how they jump, how long they can jump, how far they can jump, how fast they can move, the gravity, the physics. All of this is very important stuff. So I advise you to, before you get started on any given project, you need to just spend some time with the game and get to know it. Otherwise, you're going to find out that you'll hit a roadblock where you have to go back and basically start from scratch. And I promise you that is never a fun prospect. But not to get too scary, let's start with the planning aspect. The first thing you want to do, whether you have a piece of paper, chalkboard, whiteboard, whatever you prefer, is just think about it. What are you trying to make? What is the goal of your level design? You might be getting these requirements from someone else. You might be making them up yourself. But for the purposes of this example, let's just say that you're getting them from someone else. Let's say they give you this. It's an action RPG game. We're making a level for an action RPG game. Okay, cool. What else you got? It's multiplayer. No. We're not going to do multiplayer in this presentation. Multiplayer level design is a completely different subject from single player level design. So you'd have to come back to me and we'll talk about that later. But we're going to keep it in the single player realm for now. So what else do you got? Oh, it's a hub. Oh, okay, cool. So it's a hub map. So it's a place where the player goes to in order to get to different areas. And they'll probably revisit this place often. Okay, that's very important. And so as we go along, if you're doing this yourself, you want to start with the big ideas first, and you want to disseminate down to the more specific ideas after the big ones. So it's a city. Okay, it's a hub map that's a city. I can work with that. Something to keep in mind in terms of how we'll construct the layout of the level. What else? It's futuristic, and if you want to break that down even further, which we should, it is cyberpunk. Cool. You should maybe start to get an image in your head about how this might look, at least tangentially. What else? They want it to be in a polar setting, so we have to consider that this is an area that is cold, and people who live in it are cold. And that may not seem important right now, but when we construct our level, we might have to think about little details like the architecture of, uh, you know, what kind of things separate a tropical city from a polar city, and how do we construct that level based on these factors? And so you have all this information. And sometimes they'll give you a curveball, and you won't know what to really do with it. Like, let's say I don't know, somebody bursts in the room and say, you know what? Let's make it Lisa Frank. I just really love big, gaudy, rainbow, gross 90. I think it's gross. I'm sorry if you like Lisa Frank. And so you're just like, what the hell do I do with that? But the answer is you do your best. You do the best with what you've got. And a way to help you out is that you want to take all of these ideas, and they all are important in some level, and you want to narrow down which ones are the most important. And I've done that for you here. So I've sort of faded out the ones that are less important. You still want to keep them in the back of your mind. We are making a hub level for an action RPG game that is a city. It is cyberpunk. It is polar, and I guess for some reason we want to have some kind of rainbow aesthetics going on. But these are the kind of things that maybe an art director will take care of for you. Nonetheless, it's something you should keep in mind. So, uh, you know, next comes the researching phase. You have some keywords, you've got some ideas floating around. Now it's time to try to mine some inspiration. And so for this, I like Pinterest a lot. I know people give Pinterest a lot of shit. It's very handy for just typing in different terms, and when it spits out an image, it will give you even more images that maybe are a bit more specific related to that search term. And so I actually went on Pinterest for this, and I just kind of looked around. I typed in futuristic snow city, and I've got this kind of cyberpunk looking. I guess it's cyberpunk. It's a bit steampunky to me with the Big Ben in the background, but I think it's pretty cool. I think it can give me some ideas as to how to inform the layout of our level. Same with the city layout on the bottom left. Since it's a cold city, I kind of thought, you know what, maybe the city's layout would be a bit more enclosed, so it's easier to heat everything, just for the sake of being pragmatic. And maybe some of you can recognize that layout in the top left. That is from Deus Ex. That is the Wanchai Market. Yeah, and that's a hub map. That's you go to different places from this map, and so it's a place that players visit quite often. And there's nothing wrong at all, and in fact, it's encouraged to go back and look at successful examples of what we're trying to do. There is no point in reinventing the wheel. Learn from the greats. So this is just a small example, right? You would obviously have a lot more in your folder for this level at this stage, but hopefully you get the idea that research is important. And from here, maybe we start to think about a little bit more the crunchy side of things. We're thinking about, I call this the measuring stage. There's not really a word for it. You can call it scaling, you can call it scoping, you can call it intent. These are just words that I have come up with and the steps that I follow. But in this step, we want to think about specifically what our level is being used for. And we know it's a hub level, right? So what encompasses a hub level? It has multiple exits, it has multiple entrances. It's easy to navigate. There's nothing worse than being in a hub level and the player getting lost. And so, for an example, to talk about a different purpose and a different level, I have chosen Junon from Final Fantasy VII. A lot of people really like to talk about Midgar from Final Fantasy VII, and there's nothing wrong with Midgar. It's great. Everybody loves Midgar, but it encompasses a huge chunk of the game, really. And because of that, for me, it doesn't really count. Junon, I think, is a much nicer example because it's a much smaller part of the game and it's much more focused in what it's doing. And so, what do you do in Junon? Well, there's a parade. There's a parade. It goes down the long set of streets from the right side of the city to the left, and you navigate the city by going up levels and down levels. And everybody looks at the cannon, but really, what interests me are the streets. And so, just from navigating a couple of these streets, which just so happen to be designed in such a way that work very nicely with a parade segment, you come to appreciate what Junon is as a city. It really just kind of comes alive. Um, and so that's the kind of thing you want to think about. Obviously, when you're given a prompt to create a city, you're not going to make the whole damn city. And if you are, I hope you have help and a large budget. So you need to think about what is the best way I can represent and express the idea of this city while also expressing the purpose of this level when it comes to the player. And so in the case of Junon, all you really need is a couple of streets and maybe a couple of elevators, and the player gets the idea and it leaves an impression and it's effective. So that's what you want to do here. You're basically taking all of the more nebulous ideas, and you're sort of starting to bring in the gamification of things into your thinking. And so after you've done that, and you feel like you have kind of a target to aim at, finally, we can get to actually drawing the damn level. But we're not making the level yet. We're sketching it. And this is the sketching stage. And if you'll notice that these drawings here are actually from the original designs for Super Mario 1. I forget the name of the designer. I want to say Tezuka, but I'm not certain. But you can see that even though this is using grid paper, it's very rough while conveying the ideas that need to be conveyed. Um, I personally prefer using grid paper. You don't have to use grid paper. I really recommend it though. The more you can nail down sort of the specifics on paper without worrying about things like alignment. Uh, I wouldn't recommend doing this on a computer. Sometimes I do it anyway and I break my own rules, but I always regret it. I spend too much time worrying about making sure things are lined up. Not important. But the grid part is very important for getting things like distance and scale. Scale being a big one that will come back to bite you if you plan for it poorly. And so another thing I want you to take a look at here is that level design has composition. For let's use a 2D example. Let's use Mario. For any game, though, really, it's a screen, right? You're looking at a screen, and there's the expression "every frame a painting," and I think that applies very well in level design because you want to make sure that for every screen that the player can occupy, they have exactly the right amount of information that they need to do what they need to do, unless you're intentionally obfuscating that information. Um, so I'm trying to think of a good example here. For Mario, if you're going to have a jump across a pit, or a jump that goes downward to a different platform that's hovering above a pit, you don't want to hide where they're going off screen. You don't want the player to take a leap of faith. You have to always be cognizant of what the player sees. And that's why I keep coming back to say you always want to be in the headspace of the player. Um, Otherwise, you're just sort of shooting from the hip and saying, "Ah, yeah, sure, this is what I would do." But what if a different player does something else? And so that's very important. And there's no sort of formal endpoint. It's really just when you feel ready to move on. Although I have found that I have never spent too much time on this step. I found that the more time I spend on this step, the more it has come back to benefit me later on down the road. Um, so once you have done this, once you have thought about the mechanics and you sort of place the mechanics down in the way that you kind of expect it to work in game, then you're ready to finally move on to build. But just remember what I said at the start of this. You don't go back. You can't go back. This is the end. This is the end of the planning phase. So you have to make sure that you're ready to move on. Kiss it goodbye. You're not coming back here. So, congratulations. You're finally ready to build. Now we actually get to draw the rest of the fucking owl. So, now we're in the building phase. And the first thing we do is I say it's testing, but when I say testing, what I really mean is all you are doing is you are taking the sketch that you've made. You're not worrying about the mechanics right now. You may have sketched out the mechanics, but what I want you to do first is just take the most basic elements of your level, the floors, the walls, from start to finish, and test it. Run through it. Navigate through it. Make sure everything flows well. Make sure everything feels nice. There's no sense in adding mechanics right now, even though you've sketched it out. I know you believe in your sketch, but there's no sense in rushing it right now. Take the player or whatever mechanic through which you control the player, whatever game it is you're making this for, and just test it. Make sure that the basic building blocks of what you have work. Because if you go further and you haven't done this and you've introduced other elements, then you have a huge problem. Can't stress how important that is. After you've done that and you feel pretty good about the way things flow, maybe has a good rhythm to it, now you can start blocking things out. And if you have dev textures, if you're in 3D, or you have placeholder tile sets in 2D, they're going to be your life for a while. Don't look away. This is your future. Because you have to keep focused right now. Don't worry about making things pretty. Making things pretty comes later. Focus on your layout. This is the meat and potatoes of your actual level design. So you want big shapes. You want big ideas. If you have corridors, you want to make sure that they are just simply blocks. Go for real simple primitive shapes here. We're still doing the same thing we were doing in the previous step. We're still testing the flow of things, but we're adding more and more abstraction. But that abstraction is still itself very simple. And throughout this process, I can't stress enough that you want to always be testing. After every, I would say, moderately sized change, you want to test it. Because as we go along, if you test later and you don't test early, you will probably find something that's wrong. And when you find something that's wrong, that maybe, I don't know, you did in the first step, you basically have to undo all of your work to go back to that first step and fix it. You're taking a knife to the painting that you have laid down, and you don't have to do that. And by doing that, it takes a lot of time, and it's a mess. Better just avoid all of that and just do your due diligence. So after you've sort of blocked out the entire level in simple, nice shapes like this, and you've tested it, now you're ready to kind of pace things out. And this is the step where you start actually adding those nice little mechanics we talked about. Even the best level designer won't account for everything, but they will account for not having accounted for everything. And if you've done your due diligence, any adjustments you make as you test your level should be non destructive at this point, and it won't carve into the layout in any way. And like I said, if it does, you got a big problem. Um, and at this point, any adjustments that you make will still probably register to anybody who looks at your level as, wow, they just completely did this on the first go, and wow, they did this on purpose. If you design your levels in a savvy way, then you can make those kind of adjustments and correct your mistakes. So this is the part of level design where you want to, I don't know. In this example, this is Ocarina of Time. And if you remember the Forest Temple, you need the hook shot to get around. And so maybe in your sketch, let's say you're the designer for the Forest Temple from Ocarina of Time. You got a big job ahead of you. You're designing the Forest Temple, and based on your sketch, you're translating your sketch one to one into the world space of your editor or whatever, and you find that maybe there's too many hookshot segments one after the other in short succession. Maybe we should break up the action a little bit. Maybe there's too many enemy encounters back to back. Maybe we should let the player breathe a little bit. And so you're no longer touching your layout really. The layout is just there to serve the mechanics that you are putting in, the elements that live in that space. You want to make sure that everything has room to breathe, because again, putting yourself in the perspective of a player, do I really want to be overwhelmed by all this sort of shit that's being thrown at me? Maybe the sections should be a certain way. You're still following your sketch, right? But you're just making little adjustments, all the while, again, testing the whole way. Um, and I kind of enjoy this part. It's kind of stress free to me to have the layout done and just sort of like move mechanics around safely and be like, you know what, this still works. And so once you're happy with where you are on the step, then once again, finally, you can do playtesting. And playtesting for me is different than testing. Playtesting is okay, this is more or less functionally a finished product. There may be some parts of it that are ugly, right? Because maybe you're not an artist and maybe you have an art director who's coming in, and that's the next step, by the way. But in terms of the function and the experience, this is going to be one to one what the player experiences as a final product. This is one of the few times where iteration is truly essential to the process in game development. Um, you want to collect feedback and figure out what you can and can't do. And because we're all good level designers and we plan so well, it'll be easy to know what can and cannot be done. And so I'm going to give an example. This is the kind of thing that has happened to me in the past with 3D level design, but I've sort of changed it up a little bit. So uh, I'm sure you've seen this meme around the internet. People try to use it to convey like, oh, this is why user experience is better than design, and it's like different. This is not the purpose of this meme here. The purpose of this meme here is to convey that you as a designer may put something down. You may make the most beautiful corridor or the most beautiful like stretch of level in the world. But your players are like, hey, look, I found a way to jump on this dumpster and completely bypass that part and make a shortcut. And it's like, what do you do with that? How do you respond to that? And the way you respond is it's up to you. You are still the designer. You can be an asshole and add lava and be like, haha, you know, that'll fucking show him. And that's valid. You can do that. I done that. But you still have to test it. You still made a change, and you're going to test it, and you're going to get feedback, and maybe they'll come back to you, and they'll be like, people really liked skipping that whole entire section, and they didn't really like that you filled it with lava. So can we like do something about that? Fucking add one of those barrels that moves from Donkey Kong, and if they miss, then they hit the lava, and if they get it, they get a shortcut that brings them to the I don't know a place up ahead. They get like a head start or whatever, and you test that. And after you test that, they come back and they say, "Well, now maybe that part is too strong. Nobody's taking your original route anymore. So, maybe you should make it a bit more difficult." It's like, "All right, fine. Add one of those stupid bees from Donkey Kong so that maybe they'll hit the bee and they'll, risk versus reward." And you just keep making these little adjustments, right, as you test. And again, by the end of this, it's still going to look like you knew what you were doing the whole time. So yeah, you might come back after testing, and they might say, "Okay, well, now this is too difficult, so you have to make some changes." And then I add a second B, and then they have to just decide whether they're going to fight their enemy in the air or on the ground. But this process just kind of goes until everything feels right, until you stop hearing complaints from people, and then people are just like, "Wow, this is great." Um, Obviously, there is a danger in over designing and over adjusting. You kind of have to eventually, shit or get off the pot, as my mom liked to say. And after you've play tested enough, that's it. Like that's like you did it. That's the really really hard stuff, and now we get to go have fun. Gonna have me some water. Delicious. I'm drinking it from a wine bottle that I've just like held on to because it's a cool looking wine bottle. So I'm like water wino. Anyway, to the refinement stage. This is where you get all your artists in, you get everybody in, and now you're just like, you're dolling it up, you're adding the makeup, you're adding all the nice effects, the lens flares, and all that cool shit. So again, this step is really in no particular order because this is the kind of stage that, again, we've designed the level already. And so we're not going to go back and change that. And so, how you really choose to approach this can be a bit more free flowing and artistic. These steps in this order: polishing, rendering, texturing, lighting. Feel free to approach this with a bit more of an artist touch. But the polishing step is where you are doing final cleanup on your level. You're doing housekeeping before you invite all of your art directors and asset creators over to, fill the level up with pretty things. This might be something as simple as I don't know, if you're making a curved road or something, you might want to make sure it's really smooth. Um, if you have any other like really blocky sort of things that aren't going to become models or become swapped out for objects, you might just want to make sure you make them as pretty as you can. You're just cleaning things up, right? You might be, just fixing things. Like fixing things in the layout without changing the layout. And once you've done that, now you're actually ready to get your buddies to come in and help you. And if you're also this person who is the prop artist and the art director, if you're the level designer and these people, then I applaud you for your discipline in waiting this long. That's not an easy thing. Um, so yeah, I've had this before. Back when I worked on a multiplayer source first person shooter, I'm not a 3D modeler at all. Uh, I worked in 3D level design, but it's not the same thing as working in Blender, right? So I just had these horrible, ugly monstrosities that I knew would not survive the art pass when my prop artist buddy came in to fix things. So this is actually an example from that. I was making a Coliseum level for that game, and we didn't have that kind of nice sort of gate that you see in the bottom image there. And so what I had to do was take these Victorian ass looking fences, these, with the pointy tips on them, and I had to turn the whole thing upside down and use it as that. It was awful. but it got the point across, and it told the art director or the artist to be like, okay, yeah, I know what you're going for, and I'll get rid of this abomination for you and make this actually look good. Um, so this is the kind of step where you want to just focus on doing that sort of, getting out the ugly stuff and putting in what you expected to be there in the polished state of the level. Because, like I said, you don't want to do this early on. You want to save the step until later. Um, and so after that, or before, like I said, free flowing. Now you can start texturing things, and if you're working in 3D, that literally means textures. If you're working in 2D, that means just stripping out all of the placeholder tile sets and putting in the good stuff, right? No matter what that may be. Um, Personally, I like to do texturing before I put all of my assets and props and stuff in the level, just because I don't know, the way I look at it, it's like you want to have an empty house that's has nice wallpaper and nice flooring before you put furniture in it, right? But again, it's not a hard and fast rule. It's just the way I like to do it. Not much to be said here. This is going to be at the discretion of your art director and your best judgment of what looks good. Um, and after that, uh, lighting. If you're in 3D and you rely a lot on lighting, 2D games not so much, although a lot of them do use lighting these days. But one important thing to note is that it's not just about illuminating shadows, right? Lighting is a tool. It's not just pretty. They can help guide the player to certain things of interest in the level that you want them to navigate to. They can serve as breadcrumbs to sort of coax the player in a direction. And they can also, the lack of lighting is also useful. They can hide goodies and secrets. Um, so, let's say, for example, that your 2D game has no lighting whatsoever. I would still say that this step matters. It's just you have to sort of recontextualize your thinking a bit. Even if you don't have lights, you still have decorations. You still have things that you put into the environment that are meant to catch the eye. And those are things that you, as a level designer, can use to your advantage to get the player to notice things. Example, Portal. Portal has lighting, but that's not the point. Portal also has props that are colored. Actually, no, I'm thinking of Mirror's Edge. Portal does have these, but Mirror's Edge specifically has things that are colored in red. And those things are things the player can interact with. Usually they can jump off of them, their ladders, or their doors. And so that's kind of what I mean, using your visual language to communicate something. Oh, and after you refine this to your heart's content, and your art director and you are geeking out, and your project manager has to come over and hit you both with a newspaper because it's time to release the game, then you're done. And those are my three steps. This is again, this is a method I've developed based on kind of the way Valve software does their levels, but it's also a little bit of just kind of keeping track of my own workflow and how I do things. This is what I find works for me. There's more than one way to skin a cat, but I found with this method I can skin whole tigers. So you plan it, you build it, and you refine it. And the last image I want to leave off here with is you may recognize this. This is the map from Castlevania Symphony of the Night. And that game is known for basically having two world maps, but it's the same world map simply inverted on its head. And the reason why I like to use that as an example is because in the first map, the player eventually works their way up, getting all the mechanics they need in order to navigate the entirety of it. But by the time they get to the inverted castle, they pretty much have all the mechanics they had from the previous map, right? So they can get away with turning this entire map upside down. And if something needs to be gated, they can just add some kind of arbitrary, blocks or gates or whatever in there, and it still works. And people play this game and they're like, wow, I can't believe they planned for this entire thing, blah. And, they probably did a little bit, but they probably just designed it in such a way that they could get away with doing this. So, you know, uh, just think about that, and I want you to have fun with it. Level design is a lot of fun. Um, Maybe you're the kind of person that enjoys planning. Maybe you're the kind of person that enjoys building it, or maybe you're someone who just really wants to make it look pretty. but I'm sure you'll find that at some stages you're going to have a lot of fun with this. And that is my presentation, y'all. Thank you so much for coming out and tuning in.